Good morning, John.
Good morning.
I've been reading a lot around this subject. At times, I think I'm wading into the paranoid. I genuinely do. What is your take of this notion that Trump, a second Trump presidency, could disrupt the world order in ways that perhaps we're not fully anticipating?
If Trump gets elected, it will be catastrophic for Ukraine, for us in Europe, for the Western world, for everybody who cares about the rule of law and democracy. And of course, there are some Russians, at the moment they're not very visible, who also aspire for Russia to be decent again. And at the moment, this is all, as a Ukrainian friend of mine, Sviatoslav, he's the youngest Ukrainian MP, he said this is all down to three grandmas in Milwaukee. So it's scary stuff, Matthew, because...
Are you, and forgive me, because I hold you in the greatest respect, as you know, but can you, for the benefit of the listeners who may be less clued up, can you explain why that introduction of yours isn't paranoid? Why it's grounded in fact or reality?
I might be paranoid, but I have met Putin and Trump in person, and I know what they're like, and I have been insulted and attacked by Donald Trump, and I have been followed around the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg by the Russian secret police. And four of my Russian friends who bravely stood up to Putin, their names are Anna Politkovskaya, Natasha Estemirova, Boris Nemtsov, and Alexei Navalny, and in order: poisoned, then shot, poisoned, then poisoned again, terminally. So I know what I'm talking about.
Putin's bad, but the concern of people like yourself, academics and other journalists, is that Trump could be worse.
Well, so Trump is, if he gets in again, he will be the most powerful man in the world. But the question I think you're asking is he really the most powerful man in the world, or does he hold some fealty to Vladimir Putin? And the critical thing, and everybody can do this, is to go and have a look at the photographs taken in Helsinki after there is this very, very peculiar and unprecedented one-to-one between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump and their two interpreters. There's no one else there. This is billed for something like 60 minutes. It goes on for 2 hours. And at the end of it, Putin looked cocky and arrogant, and Trump, who's unbearably arrogant all the time, looked broken. Matthew, look at the pictures. Your listeners, look at the pictures, and you will see a blackmailer and a blackmail victim. The blackmailer is Putin. The blackmail victim is Donald Trump.
John Sweeney, John Sweeney, forgive me. I've got to bring in Sir Bill Browder. Thank you. Sir Bill Browder is Chief Executive of Hermitage Capital, head of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. Has been listening to all of that. Which bits sound paranoid to you, if any?
Nothing is paranoid. I know. I've known Putin. I've known Trump. I followed this very closely, and it's all pretty much as it is. But let's just lay this story out very simply. What it means for us, without looking too far into the future. Just looking at what Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, his vice presidential candidate, have said. They have said to us, to the world, and you know, in your introduction, you say that Trump is a mystery. He's not. He said exactly what he's going to do here. He said that all Western funding, or I say United States funding for Ukraine, will stop. Military aid for Ukraine will stop. Half of all military aid that goes in for Ukraine comes from the United States, which means that Ukraine will effectively run out of money very quickly. We're not going to double down in a short period of time to make up for the loss of U.S. military funding for Ukraine. What happens to Ukraine then? Ukraine will fight valiantly as they have. They probably won't do as bad as we fear, because they're unbelievably amazing warriors and defenders of their land. But eventually they're going to get ground down. If you remember, there was a point when Mike Johnson, one of Trump's allies in the U.S. Congress, blocked $50 billion of funding for Ukraine last year, and you could hear them. The Ukrainians were screaming that they've run out of bullets, they've run out of bombs to fight back. So there's going to be a point after Trump stops helping Ukraine militarily that they start to lose. And the loss can take several different forms. That it could mean that the Russians break over all the lines, all the defensive lines, and continue to go, and perhaps get all the way to Kiev, which was their original objective on day one. That could happen. Perhaps the Ukrainians put some defensive lines that they can support with their limited military support from us, and stop the Russians getting all the way. But the Russians at some point can declare some type of victory over Ukraine. And then the next thing that happens and comes into what your introduction, which is that Putin has designs on Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And this is no mystery. He said it out loud. Everybody else around him have said it. Those countries are former parts of the Soviet Union. He doesn't like them being independent. He doesn't like their pluckiness and their independence. And then he will make some type of military overture attack towards those countries. And this is where we get into the really nasty stuff, which is then we're all faced with a choice, and the United States is faced with a choice. Does Donald Trump honor the NATO treaty? The NATO treaty says one for all and all for one. So when Putin goes to Estonia, does the United States then go to war with Putin? And of course, Trump has said two things. One is that he's friendly with Putin, and second, that he doesn't particularly like NATO. And here's where I'm projecting, which is that Trump is not the kind of guy that's going to go to war with Russia over a country that he probably doesn't even know exists. And certainly most Americans don't know where Estonia is or any of that kind of stuff.
Would you, just from a European perspective, a UK perspective, would you foresee that we are going to have to massively change, both notionally and in the real world, how we defend ourselves? That one of the things I've been reading about is that Trump, in a reimagined NATO, Europe and the UK would have to provide the boots on the ground, the actual soldiers. America would be more remote. That is going to change. I mean, that changes everything. I mean, it really does change everything in terms of European security post-Second World War.
Well, so let's just take my scenario just a tiny step further, which is that I don't think Trump will defend Estonia and NATO. So America effectively withdraws from NATO or just doesn't participate. Yeah. And then the question for the rest of us is, do we go to war with Russia by ourselves? Yes. And the answer is, as we watched Rachel Reeves' budget, there's not a lot of money around to do any of this stuff. I mean, everyone's screaming about this and that. There's just not enough money around to do that. And so the practical decision will be probably heartbreakingly that we don't go to support Estonia, that NATO basically dissolves because of America's withdrawal from NATO. And then Putin has his way. And he can take Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Then he goes for Poland, and eventually we're going to get drawn into a European war. And eventually America will get drawn into a European war again, and then we'll be at world war. And so, and that is not being alarmist. That is not being paranoid. That is just connecting the dots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of what happens if Donald Trump comes in and then does what he says he's going to do. And this is, again, this is not unpredictable. This is what he's said.
I take your point that it's what he said. He does also have a habit of relentlessly contradicting himself and veering from the subject. But I do have to say, Bill, that you've done a very, very convincing argument, and I'm sitting here thinking, do I need to learn to speak Russian? I'm still, and maybe you, dear listener, can help out here. I would still say that and listening from Bill, I would still think that Putin is clearly the worst of the two men, but I can see how a second Trump term might enable him. And I don't know whether that makes Trump an evil man or not, but I can see that possibility. Destabilization, I think, could be coming around the corner.